Todd Nesloni, and I'm the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership for the Texas Elementary Principals and Supervisors Association, also known as TEPSA. Each week, I look to bring you a different guest who has encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another and bring them on so that they can tell some of their story in hopes that it inspires you to tell some of yours. I'm thrilled this week to have my special guest, Stephanie Clayton, on. Stephanie, tell everybody a little about who you are.
Hello. So I grew up in the Dallas area in Mesquite, Texas with my family. And I quickly moved to Houston or Victoria area in college. Soon after that, I graduated from University of Houston, Victoria. And I quickly went into student teaching in Fort Bend ISD, and which is in Houston. And I was a teacher for 5 years in kindergarten, and then I was a first grade teacher, and most recently a fourth grade teacher last year. And this year is my first year as an assistant principal. So I am a proud assistant principal at Fort Bend ISD at Arizona Fleming Elementary.
Oh man, what a year to be thrown into administration. You are learning all kinds of
Yes.
stuff this year. Well, before we jump into that, I'd love
That's
to know kind of your path into here. I mean, did you always want to be an educator when you were growing up?
I did actually. Growing up in Dallas, I have a little sister, and I used to play school with her all the time. So I knew early on, I've always loved kids. I've always had a passion for kids. So I knew it was either going to go the nursing route or education route. And I'm so proud to be in education, and I look forward to inspiring students and parents and teachers and staff every day. That's what motivates me.
So what was school like for you as a child? Did you love going to school? Were you a good student? Like, how was school for
I
you?
I loved, loved, loved school. I still love school. In fact, my husband and I joked about it that I never want to stop learning. That's just how I am. That's my nature. And so I'm always trying to learn something new, whether it's the latest form of technology or some way I can integrate it with our faculty or with my own daughter. I have a kindergartner. So I'm always wanting to learn and read new and, figure out some new ways to implement some of those ideas. But growing up, I always loved being in school. It's funny because my mom said, I don't really remember this. My mom recently told me that when I was little, it was really hard for her to get me to want to read, which is really funny now because that's all I want to do. I love
Uh-huh.
learning and reading, whether it's online or like an actual book in front of me. I love to learn and develop and grow that way. So it's kind of ironic that she told me that I had a hard time wanting to read when I was younger.
That's funny. Well, what was there a particular book that you remember that was one of the first books you fell in love with when you did start reading?
Not really, but I do remember I was definitely elementary age, but I remember having a ton of the Boxcar Children series.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember that being something that I always enjoyed reading. Um, and I think really any series probably caught my attention, much like now, the Pete the Cat and the Clifford and all of the books that our series are always fun to read because you can, notice some patterns in the books and that
Mhm.
there's a connection there. It makes it more familiar to you.
So when did you make that decision that you wanted to kind of start transitioning into a leadership administrative role?
So I got my master's in 2017. And, through that process, my husband and I were talking, and I really didn't know when was the
Mhm.
right time, and it's funny because there would be an opportunity and him and I would talk about it and we would say, I don't know if there ever will be the perfect time.
Mhm.
So we just decided as a family that we're not going to wait for the perfect time because that time may never come. And so we honestly really prayed about it and just felt like if we don't ever jump, then we'll just be waiting forever. And so we just went for it. And teaching is always my love and my passion. So that will always be something that motivates me and drives me. And I talk with my principal, Portia Dudley. She's incredible. I talk with her all the time, and we, share the same view of we want to make sure that we never forget what it feels like to be a teacher,
Mhm.
and to feel, connected and know what it's like to be in the trenches, because our teachers are amazing and they work so hard. And, regardless of how far this path goes for me, I want to make sure I never lose sight of that and what it feels like. So once that connection and you always have that lens, then I think there's some power in that in leadership.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I really learned the hard way is, when you are a teacher, you kind of think you know what those administrative roles do,
For
and then you
sure.
get in them and you're like, what the heck? I did not know you did all this. And then
Yes.
people are like, yeah, well, that's what we tried to tell y'all. And you're like, well, yeah, well, I thought I knew what you did. And so now, being a new administrator and being a first-year administrator, what's something that you've really learned about yourself through this transition?
I think for me, something I've learned about myself is um, my mindset of relationships still stays the same.
Mm-hmm.
And that means with kids, with parents, teachers, staff, community, like that hasn't changed. It's still the core of who I am, because I feel like if you don't have solid relationships with people and those around you, then you don't have trust. And so relationships are really, really important to me. But for me, something that I've learned through this process and in the transition of this being my first year as an assistant principal is really how much everyone plays such a vital role in the campus.
Mm-hmm.
So, how every single person, like our custodians, our receptionists, our aides, our teachers, outclass teachers, like everybody plays such a vital role in the success of the school.
Yep.
And so, for me, it's been so eye opening to be able to see that and live it every day with them, because we all bring something new to the table, and I learned so much from the people around me every day.
I love that. And that's a great thing to remember. And I love what you said too about the relationships piece. And I think that's so important that if you are in the classroom as a teacher and you focus so heavily on building relationships with your kids and with their parents, when you become an administrator, it's equally as important to continue that, because you've just got a new type of classroom that you're working
For
with.
sure.
Well, I kind of want to shift gears a little bit, because one of the things that I connected with you on is you shared with me that you struggle with something that I think many of our kids struggle with. So tell my viewers or listeners a little bit about that.
So when I was at University of Houston, Victoria, and I was getting my bachelor's for early childhood education, at the time it was EC through 4. And so I was playing softball actually full time. So I was playing softball and working on my bachelor's. So it was a lot, but it was awesome. And I built so many great relationships with those amazing teammates. But through that, I didn't end up graduating, and didn't end up graduating until December 2009. And through the graduation and through all that, I started beginning the testing process, generalist and the PPR. Well, I really, really struggled with the testing process.
Right.
So basically, to make a long story short with that, is over 15 plus tests between EC through 4, and then eventually transferring into EC through 6, because I didn't pass the 2 tests within the EC through 4 window. I actually had to start over and start everything over with EC through 6. So it was very disheartening. Time and time again, it was, there were many tears shed over the failed attempts over and over again. But I will say that through that experience, I learned so much about myself, because there are many opportunities and many people that could have said, and did ask me, why are you still doing this? Why is this something you're still interested in? Because, 10, 11, 12 times later, 15 eventually. And honestly, I think it may have been more than that. A lot of money, because I didn't have a job other than I was subbing at the time. And, I just had it in my heart, and I really felt a calling to be in education. And so even though it was hard to finally get to that point, it was so rewarding when I finally got my first job, because it was like, I just cried tears of joy. And my husband and I were just so grateful, because I knew that if we continued to push through it together, that we would eventually get there. And he was an incredible support system for me through that. And my family and my close friends, my aunt and uncle at the time, I was living with them. So many people really wrapped their arms around me and just surrounded me with love. and just continued to encourage me, which had been so hard for them because, time and time again, they saw me fail. But finally getting that job as a second grade teacher, my first year was just, I mean, I will never forget that moment when I got the phone call saying that I had gotten the job. And I just cried because it was just, all of that perseverance and pushing through and going through those tests and failing them over and over and over again. It was so worth it
Yeah.
because I'm exactly where I need to be right now.
Well, and we talked about how the anxiety that plays into that, and how we have so many of our kids that is such a huge determining factor, where it's not a knowledge base issue at all. The anxiety plays into it. But what I've always found interesting about things like teacher exams is passing a teacher exam does not make you any better of a teacher or mean you're any more prepared than anything else. Like, that's always been so crazy to me. I'm like, to me, it's like, if you're going to be a teacher, like, we should put you in a classroom and like judge a lesson, like not answering
Yes.
these questions where you're like, okay, I have to remember this is a perfect world scenario, not like a real life scenario, and solving all these
Right.
things. And so what I would say to you is bravo for sticking with it, because
Oh,
I
thank you.
know that's not an easy decision to make. I remember this summer I met a woman at Get Your Teach On, the national conference, and she came up to me, and I was with Adam DeVico, and she came up and she just gave us a hug, and she just started crying, and she said, she said, I keep trying to pass my teacher test. And she said, I've taken it 3 times and I don't know. I just took it the 4th and I don't know what I'm going to do if I don't pass it. She was like, and I think I'm going to find out the results while I'm here at Teach On. And it was such a weird thing, because in the session that we did, Adam played a video where it's all these inspiring sayings and phrases. And one of it says, when you fail that test for the 3rd time and then you find out you failed it the 4th as well. And she came up to her, she was like, I just got the results. I didn't pass again. She was like, but that video just spoke to me, letting me know that doesn't define who I am. It doesn't mean I'm not going to be a good teacher, and I'm going to go take it again. And I think when there are people like you, Stephanie, who are out there sharing that story, I think that's the powerful thing that I take away is, don't wear that as a badge of shame. Wear it as I persevered, I stuck with it, and I ended up where I belong, in a job that I love, with people that I can't wait to see every day. And I think that's the full circle moment. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. And to talk a little bit more about that, it's really amazing because when I got that job and I was so pumped up to be a second grade teacher, I was at a Title I campus, amazing school. But, unfortunately, in some Title I campuses, projected enrollment may differ a little bit. And so about 2 to 2.5 weeks in, we had 5 or 6 newly hired teachers that were displaced, and I was one of them.
Oh.
And I was just heartbroken. So I was the inclusion class, and I loved, loved, loved my kids. Just amazing team. It was just awesome. Loved my principal. Like, everything was just wonderful. And so it was really hard to get that news that I was being displaced. And my principal was so sweet. She called me into the office and kind of walked me through it, and I was a mess.
Yeah.
Like, just a mess. And I'm like, okay, I waited so long to finally get here, and here we are. Now I'm being moved. And I remember getting a phone call from her shortly after, telling me where I was moving. And I was displaced to Sugar Mill Elementary. And I literally told my principal, I said, I will teach anything but kindergarten. Please, not kindergarten. And ironically, I ended up in kindergarten. Right? Isn't that how it works?
That's how it works.
And so I remember that phone call, and I got off the phone and I looked at my husband and I said, babe, I don't know. This may be it for me. Like, I don't know that I can do this year. But long story short, I ended up, amazing school. Sugar Mill has been my home for the last 7 years.
Wow.
Amazing campus. I had the honor of being Fort Bend ISD's 2017 Teacher of the Year as a kindergarten teacher. Talk about
As the
God using
teacher
my
of the
story.
position you didn't want.
Yes, right? right? Then my principal asked me to move up to first grade, and I was kind of kicking and screaming because I loved kinder and I didn't want to leave. But I looped up with that group, and it was such an amazing experience. And then last year, when I taught fourth grade at the same school, I had a lot of those kids that I had the pleasure of teaching in
Oh,
kindergarten.
yeah.
So it was just a beautiful thing, and it's amazing. I could cry talking about it, but it's amazing looking back and thinking about the testing experience and how awful that was. But through that, I learned so much about myself that I'm able to apply now in my everyday role
Yeah.
as a mom, as an educator, as a wife. I mean, there's so many times where situations come up in our life where it's easy to just want to check out.
Mm-hmm.
But through that experience, as hard as it was, it really taught me a lot about myself and how, when we put our mind to something and, we really believe it's our calling and we know God's in the middle of it, it's
Right.
amazing what can happen.
Well, I mean, I think it's such a testament to sticking with things and how even in the moment when it doesn't seem like it is going to work out at all, if you keep trusting the process and pouring everything you have into it, usually it'll work out. And I think that's a great segue into my next question, and I think we'd be remiss not to talk about what we're going through as a country right now with the COVID-19 and school closures and the unexpected. And as a school leader, and this being your first year too, going and then having this to deal with, what is something that you would say to educators who are listening today?
I would say to love on your family. And I mean, not just your immediate family, but your school family. My principal and I were talking the other day about how in education, it is my husband and I, he's a pastor. And so we talk about how education is very much like ministry,
Mm-hmm.
and it's our own kind of ministry. And, at times it's hard to check out because we're thinking about that teacher or we're thinking about those kids. But we always say we need more family time. We always say that, oh man, I wish I could, just do this. And so now that we have the time,
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to be really intentional.
Right.
And we need to be intentional with our time with our spouse or our loved ones, our kids, family, and really pour into them, because it's easy to disconnect and get caught up in the busyness of our jobs or our roles. And I would say, first and foremost, we need to really focus on family. Another thing that comes to mind is, really being intentional about pouring into ourselves, because we can't pour into others unless we can, really pour into ourselves. And so whatever that looks like for you, whether that is running, whether that is reading, just having some quiet time. Maybe it's sitting down and kicking your feet up and having a drink of coffee, whatever it looks like for you.
Yeah.
But I would say that's something that I've really tried to focus on myself, because I'm not the greatest at that either.
Mm-hmm.
And for my school family, everyone, this situation makes a lot of people anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really being intentional with reaching out to people, whether it's text message, email, creating a flip grid, whatever it is, to connect and really check in on how people are doing.
Yeah.
So, everyone wants to know that their voice is heard. Everyone wants to feel loved. And I think really being intentional with your family, taking care of yourself, and also, loving on your school family as well.
And I think those are such great reminders for people to hear, because in the midst of the anxious and the unknown, I think making sure that, it's a lot of things are about perspective in certain moments. And so for us to go, you know what, I get this uninterrupted time with my family that I would either be work or homework or grading or this or that. And then knowing, just like you said, though, to check in on those around you, whether it's your friends, your colleagues, your students, their families. Just because we have to social distance doesn't mean we cut everybody out of our lives. Like, there's ways to still check in on people. And And people react into anxiety and to unknown in many different ways. And so
Mhm.
one check-in may not be enough for somebody. They may need
Right.
you to check in a couple times a day. And so I think that the advice you gave is fantastic. Well,
Thank you.
Stephanie, one thing that I want to ask before I ask my last question is, when you look at your life and all the things you've been through and all the people who've played a role outside of your family, who is somebody that has really helped shape the woman you are today?
I would say probably my mom's best friend. Her name is Nina. She's also my godmother.
Uh-huh.
Um, I've spent a lot of time with her growing up, and we don't see each other, but maybe once or twice a year now. But she has taught me a lot about just being strong and pushing through things that she doesn't necessarily articulate those things, but I think we can learn a lot from people by their actions. And her and I have like never really necessarily had a sit down conversation about this, but I observe it in her when I'm around her. So she's a
Mhm.
go getter. She's very much family oriented. And she's definitely a leader in the family when
Right.
it comes to pushing through when there's a struggle. It's not that she hides the struggle, but she always finds a way to push through and collaborate and work together to make it happen.
I love
So
that.
I would say definitely Nina has been an influencer for me.
I love that. Well, Stephanie, one way that I always love to end all of these conversations is if there was one thing that you wish more people in this world knew or understood, what would your one thing be?
Hmm. I think kind of what you talked about a little bit in this interview is the power of sharing your story. I
Mhm.
think a lot can be learned
Mhm.
from other people when you are humble enough and okay enough, I guess, really, to just be like, these are my faults, these are my weaknesses, these are my struggles. Because, in a social media consumed world, we always, and I'm guilty of this at times too, let's just be honest, of putting on a front and pretending like everything's peachy. But the
Right.
reality is the struggles and the things that we've gone through in our lives are what make us who we are. And if we can be real and honest and open about those things, people feel more vulnerable to share their story, which then
Right.
encourages somebody. Like I was telling my husband tonight, if I can just encourage one person
Right.
through this interview, that's worth it for me
Yeah.
because that's all it takes is one person to encourage you.
I love that. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for making some time to chat with me. I loved your
You're
vulnerability
welcome.
and your honesty and just your heart. And so I appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure for me. And, I say all the time that if we don't step out of our comfort zone, then we don't grow. And this is definitely not a norm for me. So this has been an awesome experience for me. And so I thank you for the opportunity and thank you for what you do too.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you so much to the listeners or viewers who joined tonight. Remember, you can check out all the past episodes of Tell Your Story on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, even YouTube, it's there. I hope today's conversation with Stephanie has inspired you to get out there and tell your story because every story matters.